Have you ever noticed how certain people seem to trigger something in you almost instantly? A way of speaking that grates on your nerves, a gesture you judge as unforgivable, a flaw you detect so quickly it's as if you're looking through a magnifying glass. The truth is, most of these reactions don't come from an objective analysis of who the other person really is. They come from somewhere far more intimate, far more silent, and almost always far more unconscious. Austrian psychoanalyst Melanie Klein warned us about a powerful and nearly invisible psychological mechanism, projection. She described projection as the process of taking pieces of ourselves, feelings, fears, insecurities, repressed desires, and expelling them from our own mind and placing them onto someone else so we can deal with them from a distance. In other words, there are things we simply cannot bear to see in ourselves. So, without realizing it, we begin to see them in others. And it's not just the negative traits we project. Sometimes we even project our own brilliance, our strength, our light, when we believe we're not worthy of possessing them. Klein believed projection is one of the very first defense mechanisms we develop in life, as early as infancy. Very young babies, unable to comprehend that good and bad can coexist in the same person, push out everything they feel is bad and deposit it in the other, usually the mother. If they feel anger, they imagine the mother is bad. If they feel joy, the mother is good. And if this infantile pattern doesn't evolve, it follows us into adulthood. Every person who crosses our path becomes a canvas where we paint our own inner colors, especially the ones we refuse to acknowledge. In romantic relationships, projection is especially intense. At first, we often project our ideals of love, beauty, and perfection onto our partner. We see in them everything we've dreamed of for ourselves. It's a delicious stage, but a dangerous one, because we're not relating to the real person, we're relating to our fantasy. Then, with time, the parts we dislike in ourselves start to emerge. The insecurity we won't admit becomes the possessive jealousy of the other. The impatience we deny appears in the short temper of our partner. The emotional immaturity we avoid seeing turns into the drama that only the other person creates. You've probably said or heard lines like, "You're too cold," "You don't know how to communicate," "You don't want commitment." Sometimes that's true, but often it's your own coldness, your own communication issues, or your own fear of commitment staring back at you, demanding to be seen. Klein invites us to face an uncomfortable truth. Much of what we condemn in others is a reflection. Here's a simple but striking example. Imagine someone in a relationship who constantly accuses their partner of being controlling. They feel suffocated, watched, restricted. But look closer, and you'll see that they themselves try to control their partner, just in subtler ways, more emotional, more indirect. They project their own controlling tendencies onto the other because they cannot accept that they have them too. It's as if every person who enters your life carries an invisible mirror. Not a perfect mirror, but a distorted one, like the kind you find in carnival funhouses, exaggerating some parts of you, shrinking others, until you can no longer tell what's truly yours and what's been cast on to someone else. With every interaction, you are reflected there, but most of the time, you don't recognize it's you. You believe you're seeing the other, that you're judging the other, that you're loving or hating the other. But in truth, you're only seeing yourself from an angle your ego cannot bear to face. Melanie Klein, Austrian psychoanalyst and one of the deepest minds of the 20th century, said that projection is one of the most primitive defenses of the psyche. It's an unconscious mechanism born in childhood, when we have no idea how to handle confusing feelings, anger, envy, or our own vulnerability. Instead of admitting something lives within us, we push it out and see it in others. The problem is, when we do this, life becomes a game of shadows. We believe we're fighting external monsters, when in reality, they are only pieces of ourselves, forgotten, rejected, disowned fragments. Projection is not just a mental trick, it's a form of self-preservation. When an emotion is too painful to feel, shame, inadequacy, repressed desire, fear of abandonment, the unconscious finds an external culprit. And in that moment, there's relief. After all, it's always easier to say, the problem is with them, than to admit, I carry this too. The cruelest part of this dynamic is that the stronger the inner rejection, the more intense the outer accusation will be. That's why we sometimes watch someone explode with disproportionate rage over something small. The anger isn't toward the other person, it's toward the reflection they've awakened. You start dating someone. At first, everything feels perfect. You see them as almost flawless, what psychoanalysis calls idealization, another defense that walks hand in hand with projection. But with time, small things begin to bother you. They check their phone while you're speaking. They forget to reply to your messages. They seem colder some days. Instead of seeing these as isolated behaviors, your unconscious pulls out old memories, maybe from childhood, of moments when you felt ignored by a parent. You don't realize it, but you begin accusing your partner of not caring, not giving attention, pulling away. On the surface, it seems you're reacting to the present. In reality, you're reacting to an old wound, one you've now projected onto them. Melanie Klein didn't see projection as a one-time act, but as a constant process shaping the way we connect. She said that as children, we can't integrate the complexity of people. We don't yet know someone can love us and still frustrate us. So we split the world into good and bad. That childish division continues in adulthood, only more subtly. And projection is the bridge between these inner parts and the outer world. The most obvious form is this: you reject something in yourself, insecurity, selfishness, anger, and you see it in others. A common romantic example: you feel afraid you might cheat or lose interest in your partner, but you can't even admit it to yourself. So you start suspecting they might be cheating on you. Every delay, every silence becomes proof of your suspicion. The other person becomes the villain. But in truth, they're only the messenger of a fear born inside you. This shows up often in couples living under the weight of the performance culture, where everything must look perfect. The fear of failing in love is so great that it's easier to blame the other than face your own vulnerability. Projection can also appear in a positive disguise. You see in someone else qualities you deeply desire, but haven't yet claimed in yourself. In the early stage of love, this is almost inevitable. You project your own capacity to love, your strength, your courage onto your partner. They become your hero, your salvation. But over time, when they fail to live up to that idealized image, the fall is brutal. Love turns into disappointment, and disappointment, if left unexplored, turns into resentment. This is one of the most fascinating concepts Klein ever developed. Here, you don't just project something onto another person, you force them to live according to that projection. For example, you believe your partner is cold or distant. Over time, you begin to behave in ways that provoke exactly that response. You shut down, criticize, demand too much. The other person, in self-defense, truly begins to pull away. And just like that, your projection becomes reality. It's as if you took a part of yourself, insecurity, fear of abandonment, placed it inside the other person and said, "Now you are this, and I'm going to prove I'm right." The problem with projection in relationships is that it builds a false narrative that slowly replaces reality. You no longer see the person as they are. You only see the character your unconscious has created. And when that happens, there's no space for real love, because true love requires seeing the other as a whole being, with both light and shadow. Imagine entering a relationship, and suddenly, everything the other person does irritates you or frightens you. You begin interpreting every gesture as proof of something: coldness, disinterest, betrayal. But most of the time, what you're really seeing is a reflection of what lives inside you. Consider a woman who grew up in a home where she felt invisible or neglected. In adulthood, she falls in love, but every small silence from her partner awakens the old fear of abandonment. She projects onto him the threat she's always felt, even if he's done nothing wrong. Feeling the constant pressure, he distances himself. What began as an imagined fear turns into reality. It's the classic projection cycle, creating self-fulfilling prophecies. This pattern is everywhere in modern relationships. Unanswered messages become drama. Small differences turn into irreconcilable incompatibilities. Ghosting isn't just the other person's behavior, it becomes confirmation of your own projected insecurity. In the beginning, positive projection creates enchantment. You see in the other person qualities you wish to have: courage, intelligence, kindness. They become your hero of your dreams. But when reality shows itself, imperfections, annoying habits, human limitations, the disappointment hits hard. And the blame often falls on them. They've changed. They're not who I thought they were. In truth, they never changed. What changed was the collapse of the fantasy you projected onto them. Projection doesn't stop at love. A coworker who seems arrogant may simply be showing you what you fear in yourself: incompetence or fear of failure. A friend who seems overly critical may be nothing more than a mirror of your own self-criticism. In the world today, this also explains why we see so many heated arguments online. Social media battles are often just projections of internal frustrations turned into external wars. The enemy is never just the other person. It's you, reflected, amplified, and distorted. Melanie Klein reminds us, projection isn't bad, it's inevitable. The problem arises when we live without realizing we're doing it. When we begin to notice the patterns, the same conflicts, the same accusations repeating themselves with different people, we open the door to awareness. Powerful questions help uncover projection. What bothers me in this partner that also exists in me? What fear am I transferring onto them? What part of myself do I reject and see in them? Answering these questions isn't easy. It's painful, but it's liberating, because when we recognize our projections, we stop blaming the other and begin to reclaim the power of who we truly are. Imagine carrying a backpack full of invisible stones. You don't even notice the weight until someone says, "Why don't you look inside yourself before you complain about the world?" Each stone is a projected emotion: anger, envy, fear, guilt. And every time you throw those stones onto others, they end up carrying your weight, often without even knowing it. Melanie Klein shows us that reclaiming our projections is an act of radical courage. It means saying, "This anger is mine. This fragility is mine. This fear is mine." When you accept this, something almost magical happens. Anger stops burning so fiercely. Fear transforms into conscious caution. Envy dissolves into inspiration. Love stops being idealization and becomes genuine, human. A couple who learns to see their projections can look beyond the distorted mirror. If he realizes his partner's constant demands come from a fear of abandonment, he can respond with empathy, not defensiveness. If she recognizes her irritation as her own internal frustration, she can act with awareness, not explode. Love stops being a battlefield of unconscious reflections and becomes a real, deep, vulnerable dialogue. In an age of digital relationships and instant connections, this is crucial. Avoiding unnecessary conflicts born from projection. Recognizing emotional triggers without blaming the other. Cultivating true intimacy by accepting not only the light, but also the shadows in your partner and in yourself. At work, seeing projections reduces conflict, improves communication, and strengthens collaboration. A coworker who seems hostile may simply be a mirror of insecurities you still carry. When you take ownership of that, irritation transforms into constructive self-criticism, and you grow. In friendships, recognizing projections prevents unnecessary resentment. You stop seeing betrayal where there's only a difference of opinion. You stop seeing arrogance where there's simply your friend's legitimate confidence. When you reclaim your projections, you break an invisible cycle. You no longer need to repeat old patterns. You no longer need to search for villains in strangers' faces or in the people you love. Life stops being a series of repeated dramas and becomes a sequence of conscious lessons. Klein once said, "You are not running from others, you are running from yourself, and as long as you run, you will always find yourself." When you face your own shadows, you discover freedom, the freedom to truly love, to relate with clarity, and to live without throwing your burdens onto the world. Reclaiming projection is also an act of self-compassion. When you realize those projected emotions are yours, you not only understand others better, you begin to deeply understand yourself. You learn to separate what is yours and needs your attention, what belongs to the other and doesn't need your control. This awareness makes life lighter, less dramatic, but far more emotionally intense. You begin to accept imperfections, yours and theirs, and you realize every relationship is actually a mirror for learning, not a battlefield. Everyone who crosses our path carries in some way a fragment of us. Sometimes it's a fragment we love and we idealize. Sometimes it's a fragment we reject and we hate. In both cases, the reflection is there. The magic happens when we finally look inside and admit, this shadow is mine. This light is mine. And when we do, we transform not only our relationships, but the very experience of being alive. Conflicts become lessons. Fears become signals to pay attention. Love becomes a real, deep, human connection. Because in the end, what we see in others has always been, first of all, a mirror of ourselves. And those who dare to face that reflection have the chance to live with more authenticity, freedom, and love. We live in a fast, digital, hyper-connected world. And in this world, projection works in subtle but powerful ways, shaping how we see ourselves and how we see others. Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn look like showcases of the perfect life. But the psychological truth is most people project only their best images or their unacknowledged pain. You see someone celebrating a promotion, and you feel a sting of envy. You see a couple smiling on vacation, and you feel frustration about your own relationship. Most of the time, these reactions have nothing to do with them and everything to do with the inner failures or unmet desires you still carry. Klein would remind us, what burns inside you when you see someone else's happiness is a reflection of what you have not yet integrated within yourself. Modern dating apps like Tinder or Bumble amplify projection patterns. You meet someone, and you pour into them your expectations, your fears, your fantasies. The ideal partner is often a projection of qualities you wish you had. The emotional enemy is a projection of everything you fear in yourself: rejection, failure, indifference. The problem begins when these projections are unrecognized. The cycle repeats. New connections, the same dramas, the same pattern of frustration. In the professional world, projection can be devastating, especially in competitive cultures. A boss who seems unfair may simply be a mirror of your own insecurity. A coworker who seems arrogant may reflect your own doubt about your abilities or worth. When we don't see this, we create unnecessary conflicts, resentment, and chronic stress. When we do see it, we gain a rare opportunity for growth, to see reality clearly, to interact consciously, and to strip away emotional drama. Our family of origin is the first stage for projection. Critical or absent parents plant seeds of pain that surface in adulthood. A mother who seemed distant may create adults who interpret any silence as abandonment. A father who criticized excessively may raise adults who hear criticism in every social interaction, even where there is none. Recognizing these patterns is liberating. It's like opening windows and letting light into the darkest rooms of the soul. To visualize projection, imagine a black canvas. Everything you reject or ignore in yourself is a blurred mark on that surface. When you project, you throw paint onto someone else's canvas, but the stain is still yours. The work is to clean the canvas, to realize that the color you thought belonged to the other was always inside you. Or imagine fragmented mirrors. Each person you meet reflects a piece of you. Some show light, others shadows. Life becomes a game of recognition. See the reflection, accept it, integrate it, and move on. The process of reclaiming projections is continuous and deep. It requires self-awareness, observing emotional reactions without judgment, inner honesty, admitting fears, desires, and vulnerabilities, empathy, understanding that the other is human, complex, imperfect, daily practice, reflecting on repetitive patterns, questioning automatic accusations, noticing when we are projecting. When done consistently, this work transforms life. Conflicts stop being wars and become conversations. Relationships become sources of growth, not suffering. Daily life becomes lighter, more conscious, more human. In a society that prizes productivity, success, and image, projection is invisible but ever-present. It makes us chase ghosts, misread signs, and create imaginary enemies. Recognizing this is an act of courage and authenticity. Melanie Klein teaches us that every projected emotion is a doorway to self-knowledge. When we open that door, we learn to love consciously without idealization, see the other for who they truly are, take emotional responsibility without blaming the world. In the end, every reflection in others is an opportunity to recognize our unintegrated shadows, to embrace our forgotten light, to live with more depth, freedom, and true love. Every person who crosses our path carries a fragment of us. Sometimes it's a fragment we love and we idealize. Sometimes it's a fragment we reject and we hate. But in both cases, the reflection is there. Melanie Klein reminds us that projection is not a sin, not a failure. It is the mind's attempt to survive, a way of coping with what feels unbearable within us. The problem is not in projecting, but in living without realizing we are projecting. When we dare to look inward, even if the sight is uncomfortable, something changes. The rage that once burned becomes understanding. The fear that once paralyzed becomes awareness and care. The envy that once consumed becomes admiration and inspiration. The love we once idealized becomes real, deep, human. Imagine a child who, out of fear, threw their anger onto others just to survive. That child grew up, but the shadow of that defense remained. Throughout life, they repeat the cycle, projecting, suffering, accusing, waiting for the other to change. But when they choose to face their own shadow, the cycle breaks. What was once unconscious repetition becomes conscious learning. Recognizing projections is taking responsibility, not blame. It is admitting that often what hurts us in others was born inside ourselves. It is freeing the other, and at the same time, freeing yourself. In love, in friendship, in family, in work, every interaction is an opportunity to see our own shadows. When we understand that what we see in the other is, in truth, a reflection, life changes its color. The partner stops being the enemy and becomes an ally. The colleague stops being a threat and becomes a mirror for growth. The friend stops being a source of resentment and becomes a chance for mutual understanding. Life stops being a constant battlefield and becomes a dialogue of recognition between light and shadow, fragility and strength, fear and courage. To reclaim our projection is not just a psychological act. It is a poetic act, almost sacred. It is admitting that every emotion, every impulse, every rejected shadow is a part of us that deserves attention, care, and integration. It is looking inward with courage and discovering that by accepting our own darkness, we make room to accept the darkness of others, without fear, without judgment, only with humanity. When this happens, we realize that love, empathy, and understanding begin within. We no longer need to use others as containers for what we deny in ourselves. We can connect with clarity, authenticity, and emotional freedom. What we see in others has always been, above all, a mirror. Every criticism, every fascination, every fear, every love, a reflection of ourselves. Whoever dares to face this reflection finds freedom. Freedom to love without idealizing. Freedom to feel without confusion. Freedom to live without carrying burdens that were never theirs. And in this encounter with the self, we realize that life is not about fighting monsters outside. It is about recognizing the monsters within, embracing them, and allowing love to expand through that understanding. Because in the end, the most important mirror that exists is not in the other. It is inside you. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.